So I was stomping on the busy main road just outside of town. Cars blazing past me. So I'm 6 kilometers into a 10-kilometer round trip that I'd entered on foot because the car was out of fuel in the beach parking lot and had been 4 days. I hadn't eaten in 4 days. I'd had a migraine for 12 hours. The sun was turning my back into charcoal, and I had just completely shit the bed on a mission that was supposed to save our asses. I walked 10 kilometers to a pawn shop to sell the only item that we didn't technically need. And it blew up in my face because the pawn shop assholes had the nerve to grow standards and reject me. I mean, how dare they? They were in a rundown shopping center in a sus part of town. Who the hell died and gave them the right to have standards? This was the end of the line. And I was walking back cursing the sky as far as I went to tell my mom that we were definitely going to die of hunger in our car, surrounded by 5 restaurants and 2 grocery stores. Everybody has a dirty little secret. Mine had 4 wheels, no bathroom, and the nerve to call itself temporary. I'm Mika, and this is Accidentally Homeless, where survival has jokes, rock bottom has wheels, and the scenic route goes straight through hell. This episode, the solution well dries up. We're checkmated, and hunger forces us to make one enormous, completely irrational life decision gamble. The car hadn't moved in days. Not because we'd mistaken the parking lot for a White Lotus destination and decided to really commit to the full resort experience. No, because we couldn't move it. Because no fuel, no money, and no food equals bitch sit your ass down and stay put. This is what stagnation looks like when your address is number 3 beach parking lot lane. You're parked so long, your booty starts to look like a car seat. You're watching the same stretch of beach for days on end. Time starts ticking backwards, and then the truth pulls up in a convertible during a rainstorm. We hadn't eaten in days. And our stomachs felt like they'd been hollowed out by the business end of an excavator. Welcome to Food Insecurity Crescent. This is a reality that we would have given anything to avoid, but it was so often what we lived here. Experiencing food insecurity is like sitting in one spot in the desert. Hot blazing sun, blasting your skin for hours, chapped lips, parched for water. Everything hurts. And all you're doing is counting down to the day that you reach the oasis. Except you don't know when that day is. So for once, night was a refuge from the day. During the day, we had to function. And when nighttime came around, we slept. Well, I mean, we tried to anyway. And when our bodies were asleep, guess what? We didn't feel hunger. It was so simple. I mean, we didn't need comfort. We didn't even need hope. What we needed was calories and money. So here's the thing with hunger. It doesn't negotiate. It just turns into desperation. And desperation made us feel like the sober equivalent of a drug addict jonesing for a fix. Almost like there's nothing that we wouldn't do for a meal. But the only thing ever on the table was to part ways with whatever held material value and turn it into cash. Like a hedge fund manager trying to monetize a private equity stake. And there we were, again, operating like hedge fund managers on a broke bitch budget. I mean, obviously, we didn't have private equity assets, but if it meant that I had to hustle the phone that I was using mid-text to get cash, then that's exactly what I did. So 1 + 1 equals set off on a mission to sell the only asset that we can afford to technically part ways with. my mom's iPad. So, there I go. 10-kilometer round trip to a pawn shop on an empty stomach and a headache pounding harder than a 90s rave. All our hope on one single transaction. Now here's the thing. If this works, we eat. If it doesn't, we don't. And then, I don't know what happens next. The point is, it's a gamble, and we've reached the go, no-go zone. So, we either win like kings, or we lose like peasants. And once again, all I see is me with my backpack on, setting out on the main road exactly like Reese Witherspoon in Wild. Finally, I get to the pawn shop. It's in this kind of run-down shopping center in the part of town. I purposely chose that pawn shop over a big pawn shop because I figured dodgy part of town equals dodgy pawn shop sellers equals fast cash with no forensic inspection. So I show them the iPad, walk them through the specs, etc. They don't want it. Just no. No deal, no money, nothing. All because of one itty-bitty, teeny-weeny, barely noticeable scratch in the corner. I'm pissed. Who the hell are these mofos to reject our iPad? I mean, they're in a random crappy no one cares about it part of town. How dare they operate like a legitimate business? So, stomping off, I go back to the beach. To hell with them. To hell with everyone. But really, the only ones who were fucked were us. And what's worse is that I had to walk another 5 kilometers back. So I couldn't even rev my accelerator and spin my tires out of anger. I could just stomp off with my little feet. But I think the real hard part was getting back to the car and telling my mom that I got nothing. And sorry I made you burn precious energy to feel relief that wasn't coming. I won't lie, that broke me a little bit. There's this point that we reach where I realized that constantly taking action and trying to fix everything was actually counterproductive. Like, I wasn't grasping the fact that we were experiencing homelessness, which meant it's supposed to look a certain way. It's not supposed to feel normal or be better than the river of hellfire that we were living. We tried something. It didn't work. And now we're out of moves. Checkmate. But checkmate usually means that the game is over and we're still kicking. So maybe the game wasn't over. But maybe we're just not the ones moving the game board pieces anymore. And that's when it clicked. What happened to us next wasn't up to us. We could make all the moves we wanted, but that's not what life was asking of us. We also realized that to us, there was a limit to how many times we could reach out for help, even though it was never about receiving a hand out rather than receiving a hand up. We'd reached a point where it was going to take an honest-to-God miracle to turn this ship around. So we took a stance. We were done asking for help. We were going to stop spinning, stop throwing ourselves at every possible solution just because sitting felt like giving up, and we were going to do nothing. Making the decision to do nothing to fix a situation that needs everything is counterproductive to the human experience. But that's what we did. We sat in our unmovable car in a parking lot on a hot Sunday. The beach was packed. People were out. Restaurants were full. And the smell of food was just everywhere. And we just sat, watching it all happen. Sticking to our guns to do nothing and almost daring God to show up and prove us wrong. And then the smallest, strangest little win happened. So my mom's the kind of person who repurposes old containers for storage space. So an old ice cream container becomes a storage space for arts and crafts, like a whole container full of feathers she'd picked up just in case she needed to create an artwork in 10 years where she needed a whole container of feathers. So I'm bored, looking and digging around for, I don't know, a different life. And I come across an old container of collagen supplements. So I give it a shake, and it sounded like craft beads. And I don't know why I actually opened it, but there it was, on the bottom of the container. Little itty bitty kernels of quinoa staring up at me like, I had just struck gold. Literally the last bit of quinoa in a jar that was supposed to be filled with crafts. I mean, it wasn't much, but it was just enough to get us through the day and into Monday. So keep in mind, we hadn't eaten in 4 days, so this was like discovering a treasure chest full of gold coins. No idea how we were going to cook it, considering we didn't have a stove, but it was a win. We were delirious and on the verge of turning to cannibalism, so it's the little things that get you through. But real talk, how do you cook food that requires a stove when you don't have a stove? The obvious solution was to drive to the grocery store and cook it in the microwave. But at this point, the car was a 21st century ornament, so that wasn't going to happen. Google told me how to cook it in the microwave. So I grabbed a Tupperware, my quinoa, water, and for the second time that day, I took to the streets and walked to the nearest grocery store. Here we go again. Another 2-kilometer round trip. Luckily, the grocery store was pretty empty since everyone was living it up in the restaurants. I mean, did it look weird that I was standing in front of the grocery store microwave full-on cooking South American grains for 20 minutes? Yeah, probably. But I didn't care anymore because we needed to eat and I had already screwed up once that day. So eventually, I get back to the car and there we were, sitting in our car, having Sunday lunch, eating unseasoned, half-cooked quinoa on a Sunday where everyone else was having a feast. It was torture, but it was also everything. I mean, you could call it a cruel joke. You could call it depressing. I called it nothing short of a miracle. And that's the thing. We had to be grateful for the tiniest wins that tilted our odds of survival. You know, the things that we'd normally take for granted. But in this life, they're the things that separated us from life and death. So really, they were huge. However, this solves nothing. We've only managed to delay the inevitable. So yeah, it's a win, but it fixes nothing. And a small win just wasn't enough. We needed a move that was going to tip the scales. We needed to get some power. We needed to grow a pair and make a game-changing move. Come in swinging like fucking Tarzan. Now, it's Monday morning. There is no quinoa. So I do the only thing that I know to do in this situation. I come up with a plan. Not a safe plan. Not a perfect one. I mean, honestly, it was batshit craziness, really. But by the grace of God, it just might work. I had decided that we were going to throw a Hail Mary. But I still had to pitch my mom and convince her that I hadn't totally lost my mind. By the way, no one problem solves better than someone who's out of options with a proverbial gun to their head. So I go to my mom and I say, just hear me out. I've got an idea and I know it's crazy, but just hear me out. I lay it out. Let's sell the car. So my idea was to sell the car, our only real asset, basically to get rid of our lifeline, our home, and then we take the cash and we rent another car. So we'd still have somewhere to live, we'd still have mobility, but then we'd also be flush with cash. Why didn't I just think of renting an apartment instead? Well, first of all, that wouldn't make for a very interesting plot twist, now would it? And as I've said before, survival doesn't always arm you with logical sense. And then you add in PTSD and you get survival logic, which is a whole other brand of logic. An apartment wasn't just a roof. It was a lease, deposit, Credit checks, references, proof of income, furniture if it wasn't furnished, and most importantly, a fixed monthly bill. And we didn't have a fixed income. So if we sold the car, we'd have a chunk of money, but we'd have no idea how long it would need to last. So spending a huge portion of it on a deposit and rent and then crossing our fingers miraculously that we'd make the next month's rent, it felt like a death trap. Renting a car would give us something an apartment couldn't. An exit. And if everything went completely to shit, we could just live in our car because we'd already proved that we can do that. And if we couldn't afford the car anymore, we could just give it back. So weirdly, the car just felt like a safer idea. But what terrified me was getting ourselves into an apartment that we couldn't afford, and then if the money ran out, having nowhere to go. I wasn't thinking a car was a better place to live. I was thinking it was a safer place to fail. And the optimist in me was trying to turn our lowest point into our turning point, even when I knew the decks were stacked against us. My mom said nothing and literally just looked at me like, holy shit, did you just decide that the thing keeping us alive is the thing that you're willing to sacrifice to stay alive? That's insane. Or was it genius? I mean, I couldn't believe it myself. My idea was basically like the equivalent of acting on an intrusive thought. You know those intrusive thoughts where your brain just suddenly goes, what if I just did something completely insane? Normally, you can dismiss them. But when you're homeless, broke, and hungry, your intrusive thoughts start sounding less like intrusive thoughts and more like business proposals. The car was the last thing standing between us and complete destitution. And my crazy ass thought it was a brilliant idea to sell it. But when you take a moment to sit with that idea, you realize that maybe the car was the thing that was keeping us stuck. This whole time, homelessness was happening to us, something that kept us powerless, and we needed power. Money is power. And when you don't have money, you don't have power. And when you don't have power, you don't have choices. And when you don't have choices, survival chooses for you. Now, a few weeks earlier, selling the car would have sounded like a suicide mission, but now it sounded like a plan. And that was probably the most frightening part because I'd reached a point where nothing was sacred anymore. We'd already started liquidating anything that could be turned into cash. So what made the car any different? The one thing standing between us and sleeping on the actual ground. But in my head, I wasn't thinking, wouldn't it be fun to get rid of our home? I was thinking, money doesn't solve every problem, but it gives us more ways to solve problems. So we need a lump sum. Because the car was two things at once. It was our roof over our heads, and it was our albatross. It gave us somewhere to sleep, but we couldn't afford to put fuel in it. And that's where I saw that maybe the thing that we'd desperately been trying to hold on to was the thing that we needed to let go of. Or maybe I was just bluffing myself because I was simply hungry enough to think that selling our only shelter was a brilliant idea. My brain stopped asking, what's the safest thing to do? And asked, what gives us the best chance of getting out of this hell loop? This was all just a theory. A bonkers idea that was either going to succeed or blow up in our faces. Full disclosure, I didn't even know if it was a good idea. I didn't know if anyone would even buy the car or if we could even sell the car on a 24-hour turnaround deadline since we needed the cash as in yesterday. Could we rent another car? Would we even get enough money to make this a reality? I didn't know much, but I knew that something had shifted and that I'd entered the land of possibility. But the land of possibility is also the land of danger and landmines. And once you get a taste of a decision like that, there's no going back to the version of you that didn't think of it. Because what this all meant is that now we weren't just surviving homelessness. We were about to gamble with the one thing that we'd been using to survive it. And that gamble was about to be the beginning of the end. Because apparently, when you've run out of money, food, options, and common sense, the next logical thing to do is to put your home up for sale. Next time, the decks are stacked against us. Do we pull off selling the car? Or does it blow up in our faces?